The Duke of Blackwood, a man for whom the world was a ledger of assets and liabilities, considered the acquisition of Miss Eleanor Vance a matter of straightforward accounting. Her family's estate, Penhurst, was the liability, drowning in debt. His need for its contiguous border with his own lands was the asset. The marriage was simply the mechanism of transfer. He dictated the final letter to his solicitor, Mr. Davies, his voice as dry as the rustle of old deeds. He paced the length of his London study, a room of dark wood and darker leather, the city's gray light barely penetrating the tall windows. "The terms are acceptable," Alistair said, his gaze fixed on a map of his northern holdings. Penhurst was a pale, vulnerable patch of green interrupting the swathe of Blackwood blue. "The Vance debts will be settled in full upon my marriage to their daughter. The title to the estate will be transferred to me, to be held in trust for any subsequent heir." Mr. Davies, a man who had served 2 generations of Blackwood dukes, made a careful note. His pen scratched, a small deferential sound in the monumental quiet of the room. Alistair stopped pacing. He turned to the window, looking down at the ceaseless, oblivious motion of the street. "She is a negligible factor in this equation, Davies. I have met her twice, plain, quiet, and without influence. It is, in fact, her primary recommendation." He paused, a faint, mirthless smile touching his lips. It was a statement of fact, not cruelty. It was a calculation. "She has no allies in this county," he concluded, the words crisp and final. "There will be no meddlesome relations or powerful friends to complicate the matter. It is clean. See it done." Davies bowed his head, his face impassive. "Very good, Your Grace." The letter was dispatched. The arrangements were made. The wedding was a muted affair in a country church smelling of damp stone and fading piety. Eleanor Vance wore a simple gown of cream silk that had belonged to her mother. She did not look at him, not really. Her gaze was directed at a point just past his shoulder, as if she were observing a distant horizon he could not see. Her vows were a whisper, swallowed by the cavernous space. He saw her as an object, a well-made but unremarkable piece of furniture he had acquired for a room he rarely used. She was the Duchess of Blackwood now, a title that sat upon her like a borrowed cloak, several sizes too large. They traveled to his primary seat, Blackwood Manor, in a state of near total silence. He read his papers. She looked out the window. He noted, with a kind of detached approval, that she made no attempts at trivial conversation. She understood the nature of their arrangement. She was, as he had surmised, practical. Her presence in the house was a subtle shift in its atmosphere. It was the difference between an empty room and a room in which someone was quietly sleeping. She was there, and she was not there. At dinner, she sat at the far end of the long, polished table, a small, still figure dwarfed by the baronial splendor of the dining hall. The portraits of his ancestors, stern and acquisitive men in velvet and lace, seemed to gaze down on her with the same disinterest he felt himself. He was a man of grand projects. His passion was not for people, but for systems. He was in the midst of a vast agricultural undertaking, a plan to drain the low-lying fens on his property, creating hundreds of acres of new fertile farmland. It was a war against water and tradition, and it consumed him. He gave his new duchess the run of the house. He assigned her the household accounts, a task he considered tedious but necessary. He expected her to occupy herself with needlepoint or watercolors, the traditional pastimes of women of her class. He did not think of her at all, most of the time. Then, the first small disruption occurred. She requested an interview with him in his study, a sanctum. No woman but the housekeeper had ever entered with purpose. He was annoyed by the interruption, but granted it. She stood before his desk, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She was not as plain as he had first thought. Her eyes, a shade of mossy green, were intelligent. He had simply never bothered to look into them. "Your Grace," she began, her voice low and even, "I have reviewed the household accounts. They are in order." "Good," he said, waiting for her to leave. She did not. I would now like to see the estate ledgers. Alistair leaned back in his chair. A flicker of surprise quickly suppressed. The estate ledgers? They are complex. He meant, they are beyond you. I am proficient with figures, she stated. It was not a boast, it was information. He was amused. He felt a sudden, perverse curiosity to see how she would fail. He imagined her staring, bewildered, at the columns of crop yields, tenant rents, and drainage expenses. Very well, he said, a patronizing edge to his voice. Mr. Hobbs, my steward, will provide them for you. She gave a small, formal nod. Thank you, Your Grace. And she was gone, leaving a faint scent of lavender in her wake. He forgot about it almost immediately, returning to his maps, his mind once again filled with the satisfying logic of canals and sluice gates. A week later, he hosted a dinner for some of the local gentry. It was a necessary chore, a political requirement he endured with strained patience. The conversation was a predictable mire of gossip and complaints about the weather. Lord Ashworth, a foppish neighbor with more title than sense, was holding forth on the foolishness of Alistair's drainage project. All this disruption for a bit of mud, Blackwood, Ashworth drawled, swirling his wine. You will ruin the snipe shooting. My father always said, leave the land as God made it. Alistair felt a familiar surge of contempt. He was preparing a withering retort when a quiet voice spoke from the other end of the table. God, I believe, also made the Dutch, Eleanor said. The table fell silent. All eyes turned to the Duchess. She had not raised her voice. She was looking at Lord Ashworth with an expression of mild inquiry. They have been reclaiming land from the sea for centuries, with great success. And I believe the soil in the fens is peat, not mud. It is exceptionally fertile once the water table is managed. The Romans knew as much when they built the Car Dyke. She took a delicate sip of water. A stunned silence hung in the air. Lord Ashworth's face, a moment before so smug, had turned a blotchy red. He had been dismissed, gently and irrevocably, with a history lesson. Alistair stared at his wife. He had not known she knew anything about Roman engineering or Dutch polders. He had not known she knew anything at all. A strange, unfamiliar feeling pricked at him. It was not pride. It was recalibration. His assessment of her had been flawed. The asset was not as simple as he had believed. Later that evening, as he was passing the music room, he heard the sound of a pianoforte. He paused. He had assumed the instrument was merely decorative. The music was not the simple, plodding tune of a schoolgirl. It was a complex, melancholic piece by Chopin, played with a skill that spoke of thousands of hours of dedicated practice. It was beautiful. It filled the cavernous, empty spaces of the manor with a sudden, aching soul. He stood in the shadows of the hallway, listening. He saw her profile, her focus absolute. In that moment, she was not the negligible factor. She was not the quiet, plain woman from the church. She was a creator of intricate, heartbreaking beauty. He felt a tremor of something he could not name. He dismissed it as an anomaly and went to his study. But he could not entirely dismiss it. He found himself listening for the music in the evenings. He found himself paying closer attention at the dinner table, waiting for another flash of her unexpected dry wit. He told himself it was merely intellectual curiosity. He was a man who appreciated complex systems, and she was proving to be a more complex system than he had anticipated. She never brought up the estate ledgers again, and he assumed she had been defeated by them. He felt a small, uncharitable sting of satisfaction. He had been right after all. The inciting incident, when it came, was a masterpiece of banal bureaucracy. A new, flustered secretary, eager to impress, was tasked with sorting the Duke's outgoing and incoming mail. In his haste, he misplaced a single folded letter. It was the letter Alistair had dictated to his solicitor weeks ago, the one confirming the final terms of the marriage contract. The secretary, seeing the ducal seal and assuming it was a document for the Duchess's attention, placed it with a small stack of household correspondence on the writing desk in her private sitting room. Eleanor found it that afternoon. She saw the seal, the familiar script of Mr. Davies's clerk. She assumed it was some legal matter pertaining to the household. She broke the wax. She read it once, her face betraying nothing. Her world did not shatter. It simply clarified. The vague, formless unhappiness that had haunted the edges of her new life now had a name and a text. She is a negligible factor in this equation. The words were not written in anger or passion. They were cold, clinical, the assessment of a man weighing a sack of grain, plain, quiet, and without influence. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. She saw a woman with a straight nose and serious eyes. She was not a diamond of the first water, she knew that. She was quiet because she had learned long ago that most people were not worth speaking to. She has no allies in this county. This was the line that settled deep in her bones. It was not just a dismissal of her person, but a denial of her history, her connections, the web of quiet affections and duties that had made up her life before him. He had not just bought her land. He had presumed to own her context and to find it worthless. She did not cry. Her heart did not break. It hardened. It was like watching a pool of water freeze in winter, a slow, silent, crystalline transformation from fluid to solid. With hands that were perfectly steady, she refolded the letter along its original creases. She smoothed it flat. She slipped it back into its envelope and placed it at the bottom of the stack of papers, as if it were a bill that had been paid. Then she stood up and walked to the music room. She closed the lid over the keys of the pianoforte. The click of the wood was soft, but in the silence of the house, it sounded like a door being locked. The music stopped. Alistair did not notice at first. He was consumed by a crisis with his drainage project. A section of a newly dug canal had collapsed after a week of heavy rain. He spent his days in muddy boots, shouting at engineers and foremen. He returned to the manor late, exhausted and ill-tempered, ate his dinner in preoccupied silence, and retired to his study. It was perhaps a week later that the silence began to register. The house felt different, larger, emptier. The air seemed thinner. He was walking through the great hall one evening and realized what was missing: the music. There was no Chopin drifting from the music room. The space was dark, the pianoforte a hulking mute shape in the gloom. He felt a strange pang of disappointment, followed by irritation. Had she grown tired of her hobby? The next day he noticed something else. At dinner, she was no longer a quiet presence. She was an absence. She sat in her chair, she used her fork and knife, she raised her glass to her lips. But her spirit had evacuated the premises. Her eyes were veiled. When he spoke to her, her answers were monosyllabic, impeccably polite, and utterly devoid of content. The flash of wit, the spark of intelligence he had begun to look for, was gone. She was there, and she was not there. He found himself watching her. He catalogued the changes. She no longer went to the library. The books on horticulture and history she had been reading now lay on a side table, a silken bookmark still marking a page she would never turn. She spent her time walking. He would see her from his study window, a solitary figure striding across the park, always heading in the direction of the tenant farms and the small village of Oakhaven that huddled at the edge of his estate. He told himself it was a fit of pique, a feminine mood. It would pass, but it did not pass. The silence deepened. The emptiness of the house became a physical presence, a pressure in his ears. He began to feel an unfamiliar restlessness, a sense of profound unease. He had engineered his life for maximum efficiency and minimal emotional disruption. Now, a quiet woman's quiet withdrawal had thrown his entire system into disarray. He was annoyed. He was unsettled. He was, to his own astonishment, lonely. The catalyst for his understanding was, as it so often is, a servant. He was speaking to Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, a woman whose tenure at Blackwood Manor was longer than his own. He was complaining about a problem with the laundry. "The Duchess has already seen to it, Your Grace," she said calmly. "She arranged for the new copper to be installed last week." Alistair frowned. The Duchess did? Oh, yes. She has a remarkable head for organization and a kind heart. Mrs. Gable allowed herself a small, rare smile. The village folk in Oakhaven are already quite devoted to her. She has been talking to them about the well. The old one runs dry every summer, you know. It is a great hardship. The housekeeper's words snagged on a hook in his mind. The village folk are already quite devoted to her. He heard his own voice, echoing in the cold space of his memory. She has no allies in this county. The contradiction was stark. It was a flaw in his data. That afternoon, a gnawing suspicion took hold of him. He went to her sitting room. It was tidy, impersonal. A room for a guest, not a wife. On her desk was the neat stack of correspondence from weeks ago. He did not know what he was looking for, but he felt an undeniable compulsion. He sifted through the papers, and there it was, the letter from Davies. He picked it up. He knew his own stationery. He knew the way his solicitor folded his letters. But this one, the crease was not quite as sharp. There was a subtle softening of the paper along the folds, the faintest hint of a second, more careful refolding. It was the ghost of an action, the evidence of a thing opened and then closed. His heart began to beat a heavy, painful rhythm against his ribs. He pulled the letter from its sleeve and read his own words. She is a negligible factor, plain, quiet, and without influence. She has no allies in this county. He read them not as he had dictated them, as a cold assessment of a business transaction, but as she must have read them, as a brutal, comprehensive dismissal of her entire worth as a human being. Anaphora of realization struck him. He thought about the music stopping, not as a whim, but as a deliberate withdrawal of beauty. He thought about her silence at the dinner table, not as a mood, but as a refusal to perform for her captor. He thought about her walks to the village, not as idle meandering, but as a search for a place where she was not considered negligible. He thought of her request for the estate ledgers and his own patronizing amusement. He saw it all now in a new, horrifyingly clear light. He had not married a woman. He had purchased a commodity, and he had made sure to write down, in black and white, exactly how little he valued it. A wave of shame, so profound and acute it was physically nauseating, washed over him. He had prided himself on his intelligence, his perception, his ability to see the heart of any matter. And he had been blind. Utterly, arrogantly, catastrophically blind. He had made a significant error. But it was not an error of accounting. It was an error of the soul. He sank into the chair at her desk, the letter clutched in his hand. The quiet, orderly room suddenly felt like a cell, her cell, the one he had built for her with his indifference, and he understood. The problem was not that the music had stopped. The problem was that he had only noticed its absence, not the artist who had created it. He had to find her. It was not a request, but a compulsion. He left the house, ignoring the confused look from his butler. He did not take a horse. He walked, his long strides eating up the manicured lawns and plunging into the wilder parkland beyond. He walked towards Oakhaven. He found her where Mrs. Gable had said she would be, near the village green, beside the old stone well. It was a dilapidated thing, circled by cracked flagstones and covered with a mossy, warped wooden lid. Eleanor was not alone. She stood with the village reeve, a grizzled man named Thomas, and a younger man Alistair recognized as a stonemason from the next town over. She was not the absent ghost from his dinner table. Here she was vibrant. She held a roll of papers, a diagram of some kind, and she was pointing to a spot on the ground, her expression animated, her voice clear and decisive. She was not asking for permission. She was giving instructions. The two men listened with an air of profound respect, nodding as she spoke of water tables, geological strata, and the merits of a deeper bore. Alistair stopped at a distance, concealed by the trunk of an ancient oak. He watched his wife. He watched the Duchess of Blackwood command the attention of working men, not through her title, but through her competence. He saw the easy rapport between them, the shared purpose. Mrs. Gable was wrong. The villagers were not just devoted to her, they were her allies. He had said she had none, and she had gone out and made them herself. He felt a fresh, sharp pang of something that was part admiration, part despair. He had looked at a queen and seen only a pawn. He waited. He waited until the mason had left and the reeve had tipped his hat and ambled away. He waited until she was alone, standing by the well, her hand resting on the cool, damp stone. The late afternoon sun caught the auburn threads in her brown hair. He stepped out from behind the tree. She saw him and her animation vanished, the mask of polite indifference descending once more. Her body stiffened. She did not look like a wife seeing her husband. She looked like a prisoner seeing her guard. He walked towards her slowly, stopping a few feet away. The air between them was thick with all the things they had never said. He held out the letter. "I found this on your desk," he said. His voice sounded rough, unfamiliar to his own ears. "I believe you have read it." She did not take it. Her gaze was steady, her moss-green eyes unreadable. "Yes." The single word held no anger, no accusation. It was a flat confirmation of fact. It was more damning than any tirade. He had rehearsed a dozen speeches on the walk over. Apologies, explanations, justifications. They all crumbled to dust in the face of her quiet dignity. They were insults. The only thing left was the truth. "I was wrong," he said. The words felt inadequate, pebbles thrown against a fortress wall. He had to make her understand the depth of his meaning. "Not just about the letter, not just about what I wrote. I was wrong about everything. About you." He took a step closer. "I looked at you and I did not see you. I saw a solution to a problem, a negligible factor. That is what I thought. It is what I wrote. It is the act of a fool and a blind man." Her expression did not change. She was listening, but he did not know if she was hearing. "The music," he said, the word coming out in a rush. "You stopped playing. I noticed the silence. I did not deserve the music. I did not deserve the conversation. I did not deserve the woman who could debate Roman engineering with an idiot lord and then spend her evenings reading about crop rotation in the estate ledgers I assumed you could not comprehend." He saw a flicker in her eyes then, the barest hint of surprise. She had not known he had noticed any of that. "I am not asking for your forgiveness," he said, and he meant it. Forgiveness was a gift, and he had no right to ask for anything. "That is not my place. But I must atone. My actions were based on a flawed premise, an insult. I have to correct the record, not just for you, but for me, for the truth of the matter." He had her attention now. She was watching him with a new intensity, the careful, analytical gaze he now recognized as the mark of her intelligence. She was assessing him. The moment for his decisive action had arrived. It had come to him on the walk over, a clear and simple path. The annual county agricultural ball was the following week. It was the premier social event of the season, a gathering of every landowner and person of influence for miles around. It was a stage. Lord Ashworth, predictably, sought him out. He found Alistair and Eleanor near the ballroom entrance, and his smile was laced with condescending poison. "Blackwood, and the Duchess." He gave Eleanor a theatrical bow. "I hear you have become quite the village philanthropist, digging holes for the peasants. A charming, if rather dirty, little hobby. Do you provide them with tea and biscuits as well?" A ripple of snickering went through the small crowd that had gathered around them. In the past, Alistair would have ignored Ashworth, dismissing him as beneath his notice. But tonight, Ashworth was not just an irritant, he was an opportunity. Eleanor stood perfectly still beside him, her face a pale, composed mask. He could feel the tension radiating from her. She expected him to do nothing. That is what he had taught her to expect. He turned to face Ashworth fully. He did not raise his voice. He pitched it to carry, a crisp, cutting tone that sliced through the ballroom chatter. "Ashworth," he said, "your persistent ignorance never fails to astonish. It is the one constant in a changing world." Ashworth's smirk faltered. "What you call a little hobby," Alastair continued, his gaze sweeping over the listening faces, "is, in fact, a feat of engineering and social planning that would be far beyond your comprehension. The Duchess has identified a critical failure in the infrastructure of this county, a problem men like you have been content to ignore for generations because it does not affect your snipe shooting." He took Eleanor's hand. Her fingers were cold, but they did not pull away. "She has researched the hydrology of the Oakhaven Basin. She has designed a new deep-bore well system, and she has secured the labor and expertise to see it done. It is not a charity. It is an investment in the health and productivity of the people who are the backbone of this entire region. It is a project of more substance and lasting value than anything you will achieve in your entire lifetime." The silence in their corner of the ballroom was now absolute. "And to ensure it proceeds without the distraction of comments from fools," Alistair concluded, his eyes locking onto Ashworth's, "I am announcing tonight that the Blackwood estate is funding the project in its entirety. The management, however, remains completely under the Duchess's authority. Her authority. Because, unlike some of us, she knows what she is doing." He looked down at Eleanor. For the first time since she had read the letter, she was looking directly at him. Her eyes were wide, and in their green depths, he saw not forgiveness, not yet, but a dawning, shocked comprehension. He had not just defended her. He had championed her. He had taken her quiet, private work and held it up to the light for all to see. He had become her ally, in front of the entire county. The act in the ballroom was a beginning, not an end. It was a public declaration, but the private treaty was yet to be negotiated. Eleanor did not melt into his arms. Her gratitude, if she felt it, was a guarded, watchful thing. The new terms of their marriage were never spoken aloud. They were laid down in the quiet spaces, in the things he now chose to do. The rebuilding of their relationship was a construction project as deliberate and painstaking as the digging of the new well. He began by showing up. The day after the ball, he appeared at the Oakhaven well site. He did not come as the Duke to inspect and command. He came as an observer. He stood quietly, watching her confer with the foreman. He listened as she explained a modification to the drilling apparatus, her language precise and technical. When she finally acknowledged him, her expression was wary. "Your Grace." "Alastair," he corrected her gently. "My name is Alastair." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I came to see if you needed anything," he said. "I need the funds you promised," she replied, her tone businesslike. "They have already been transferred to an account in your name. You have sole discretion." This seemed to surprise her. She had expected oversight, a committee, his hand guiding hers. He was offering her true agency. He made it a habit. He would spend an hour each day at the well site. He learned the names of the men working there. He asked questions. He learned about the challenges of drilling through the subsurface layer of shale, a problem that had thwarted previous attempts. He learned it from her. He was the student, she the master. He started to notice the small things, the details he had been blind to before. He noticed the way she bit her lip when she was deep in concentration over a diagram. He noticed the smudge of dirt that was almost always on her right cheek by the end of the day, and the fierce, private satisfaction in her eyes when the foreman reported they had drilled another 10 feet. He brought her a book one evening. He found her in the library, a room she had started to frequent again. He placed it on the table beside her without a word. It was a rare, illustrated treatise on Roman aqueducts he had ordered from London. She looked from the book to his face. "Thank you," she whispered. It was the first unguarded thing she had said to him in weeks. The house began to change. One evening, as he passed the music room, he heard a hesitant, exploratory melody. It was not the passionate Chopin of before. It was something quieter, more questioning. Satie, perhaps. He stood in the hall and listened and felt a profound, swelling hope. The music was returning, He found ways to be her partner. His own drainage project required a great deal of political maneuvering with neighboring landowners. He began to consult her. He would spread his maps on the library table and ask for her opinion. "Lord Hemlock is blocking the diversion of the stream," he told her one night, frustrated. "He claims it will affect his water meadows." She studied the map for a long time. "He is lying," she said finally. "The stream doesn't feed his meadows. It feeds the mill at Ashton. He owns the mill. He is worried about a reduced flow in the summer months affecting his profits." Alistair stared at her. "How do you know that?" "It was in the Penhurst estate ledgers," she said simply. "My father had a dispute with his father over the same issue 20 years ago. There are letters and surveyors' reports." He looked from her calm face to the map. Her knowledge, acquired from the very ledgers he had assumed were beyond her, had just given him the key to unlock his entire project. She had seen the pattern he had missed. She saw the whole board. The external conflict, the one with Lord Ashworth, resolved itself with a satisfying irony. Ashworth's own tenants, hearing of the Duchess's well at Oakhaven and suffering from their own water shortages, petitioned him for a similar project. When he refused, citing the cost, they sent a delegation not to him, but to the Duchess of Blackwood. Eleanor received them, and with Alistair's quiet backing, she drew up a proposal for a cooperative, a system whereby several estates could share the cost and benefits of a centralized water management plan. It was a brilliant stroke of diplomacy and engineering. Ashworth, faced with a near revolt from his tenants and the humiliation of being outmaneuvered by the woman he had mocked, was forced to join. His capitulation was total. The night the agreement was signed, Alistair found Eleanor in the music room. She was not playing, but simply sitting before the pianoforte, her hands in her lap. He did not speak of Ashworth or of water tables. He spoke of her. "I have been thinking about the word negligible," he said, his voice quiet in the still room. "It means able to be ignored. Forgive me if this is painful, but I must say it. I built our marriage, this life, on the idea that you could be ignored." She turned to look at him, her face lit by the soft moonlight filtering through the window. "I was the worst kind of fool," he continued, "the kind who mistakes silence for emptiness, and wit for an anomaly, and competence for a hobby. I look at you now, and I cannot imagine a life where you are not the center, not a factor in an equation, but the very axis around which my world now turns." He knelt before her, taking her hands in his. They were no longer cold. "I did not know what love was. I thought it was a poetic indulgence, an inefficiency. I know now that it is attention. It is the act of seeing someone, truly seeing them, in all their complexity. And I see you, Eleanor. I see you, and I love you. I love your mind and your resilience and the way you fight for people without ever raising your voice. I love the woman who built a well, and in doing so, rebuilt a man." Tears welled in her eyes. They were the first tears he had ever seen her shed. They were not tears of sorrow or anger. They were tears of release, of a long-held tension finally letting go. "Alistair," she whispered, and the way she said his name was a song in itself. He had not asked for forgiveness, but in that moment, in the quiet music room, with the moonlight as their witness, she gave it to him anyway. The transactional contract was finally, fully, superseded by an emotional one. A year passed, a year of shared purpose and deepening intimacy. The seasons turned, and Blackwood Manor, once a cold monument to a man's ambition, became a home. It was filled with warmth, with conversation, and often with music. The day came for the official inauguration of the new well at Oakhaven. The entire village, and indeed much of the county, turned out. A small, tasteful plaque had been affixed to the new stone housing of the pump mechanism. It did not mention the Duke. It read simply, "The Duchess's Well." Eleanor stood before the crowd, her hand resting on Alistair's arm. She was wearing a simple dress of deep green that matched her eyes, and her pregnancy was just beginning to show, a gentle curve that spoke of future and fruition. The village reeve, Thomas, gave a short, heartfelt speech. He did not speak of her title. He spoke of her tireless work, her intelligence, her kindness. He spoke of how she had come to them, listened to them, and solved a problem that had plagued their grandparents. "She came here a stranger," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And now, she is the heart of this place. She is our ally." Alistair looked at his wife. He saw the faint blush on her cheeks, the quiet pride in her eyes. He remembered his arrogant, ignorant words to his solicitor. "She has no allies in this county." Now the entire county was her ally. They had built a well in her name. Later that evening, they sat together in the library. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the book-lined walls. Alistair's grand drainage project was a resounding success, but he saw it differently now. It was not his solitary achievement. It was one half of a whole, a partnership with the land, and with the woman who had taught him how to truly see it. She was reading, her head bent over a book, a small, contented smile on her lips. He did not need to speak. He simply watched her. This woman he had once dismissed as a negligible factor. He had thought he was acquiring a piece of land, a solution to a logistical problem. He had instead acquired a universe. He had stumbled, through his own blindness and her quiet grace, into a happiness so profound it felt like a form of prayer. She was not an asset in his ledger. She was the hand that held the pen. She was the one who balanced the books of his own soul. He had started by failing to see her, and he knew now that he would spend the rest of his life gratefully in the act of looking. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for listening. Tell me in the comments below, if you were in the Duchess's position and setting new terms, what one condition would you have added to the arrangement? We truly hope you enjoyed this tale. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories like this one. Your support helps us bring these worlds to life. Our next story involves a secret correspondence, a disgraced botanist, and a duke who believes flowers are a frivolous waste of time. They arrive here, at the Manor of Stories, whenever they are ready.